All right, so here's the deal. Things just got pretty interesting for the Seahawks. And if you've been following everything lately, you probably felt like the roster was already shifting after the draft, but now it's really starting to take shape in a way that might surprise some people. I'll tell you all the details, so click the like button if you've been a Hawks fan for more than 25 years, and comment below. Go Hawks! The Seattle Seahawks have just made a move that immediately shifts the conversation around this roster, and it came at a moment when fans were still digesting everything from the 2026 NFL Draft. Running back Cam Akers has been released, a decision that surfaced right after the team wrapped up its draft evaluations, and it signals that Seattle is already reshaping the depth chart with a very clear direction in mind. This isn't just a routine post-draft adjustment. It's a move that raises real questions about what the Seahawks are planning at one of the most important positions on the offense. We knew changes were coming. Every NFL team tweaks the roster after the draft, especially one coming off a Super Bowl victory and looking to sustain that level. But this specific decision stands out because it directly connects to what Seattle just did in the draft and what they lost in the offseason. Kenneth Walker III, who played a massive role in that championship run with 313 rushing yards across 3 playoff games and a dominant Super Bowl performance, is gone after landing a big contract elsewhere. That left a void. And now, with Akers out, that void is even more clearly being handed over to the new generation. And that's where Jadarian Price enters the picture. The Seahawks didn't just draft him, they positioned him to potentially become the centerpiece of the running game right away. There were doubts about where he was selected, whether he was worth that spot, but the more you evaluate his skill set, the more it aligns with exactly what Seattle wants to do offensively. This is a team that leans on zone running schemes, and Price fits that mold almost perfectly. He has the vision to read lanes, the burst to hit openings quickly, and the kind of speed that can turn a routine carry into an explosive play. That's something this roster was missing after Walker's departure. What makes this even more interesting is that Price isn't just a theoretical fit. There's a growing belief inside the organization that he can handle a high volume of carries early in his career. Ball security has been manageable, with only a few fumbles noted, and while there are areas to improve, like pass protection and receiving out of the backfield, the foundation is there for him to take over early down responsibilities. When you connect that to the release of Akers, it becomes hard to ignore the possibility that Seattle is clearing the runway for Price to step in as RB1 much sooner than expected. But this story doesn't stop at the running back position. What John Schneider did in this draft is starting to look more and more like a calculated strategy, rather than a simple series of picks. Coming in with only 4 selections, he maneuvered through trades to double that number, showing once again why he's considered one of the best in the league at navigating draft boards. He didn't panic despite picking late in each round after winning the Super Bowl. Instead, he leaned into the situation, finding value and targeting players who fit specific needs. Mel Kiper Jr. recognized parts of that strategy, even if his overall grade didn't fully reflect it. He pointed out that Seattle had clear needs: running back, cornerback, edge rusher, and offensive line, and questioned whether they addressed them effectively and early enough. But when you look at the actual outcomes, it's difficult to argue that Schneider didn't check those boxes. The team found a running back in Price, reinforced the secondary with Bud Clark, and added depth and competition along the offensive line with Bo Stevens. Clark, in particular, is a fascinating addition. The Seahawks didn't necessarily have a glaring hole at safety, but they did lose a key playmaking presence when Kobe Bryant left. Clark brings that ball-hawking ability back into the defense. With 15 interceptions over 4 seasons and standout athletic testing numbers, he has the profile of a player who can create turnovers and shift momentum. That's something Seattle's defense thrives on, and it adds another layer of competition in the secondary that could pay off quickly. Then there's Bo Stevens, a move that might not grab headlines but could end up being one of the most important from this class. Seattle needed help at guard, and Stevens fits the system with his strength in zone-blocking schemes. There's already talk that he could compete for a starting role right away, which makes the draft capital spent to acquire him look far more reasonable. If he steps in and performs early, that decision becomes a clear win. Still, not everyone is fully convinced. Kiper gave the Seahawks a B-, citing concerns about whether these players can make an immediate impact for a team that's firmly in a win-now window. That's the core of the debate right now. Did Seattle do enough to stay on top immediately? Or are they balancing short-term success with long-term sustainability? From this perspective, it feels like the Seahawks are trying to do both. They addressed key needs with players who can contribute now, but they also took calculated risks on developmental talent later in the draft. It's a blend of immediate reinforcement and future planning, something that not every contender manages to execute effectively. And that brings us back to the original move, the release of Cam Akers. It's not just about removing a name from the roster. It's about signaling confidence in what's next. Confidence in Jadarian Price. Confidence in the direction of the offense. Confidence that the pieces added in this draft can keep this team competitive at the highest level. So now the question shifts to you. Do you believe Jadarian Price is ready to take over as the Seahawks RB1 right away? Or do you think Seattle still needs another move to truly secure that position? And when you zoom out even further, this entire situation starts to feel like a calculated transition rather than a reaction. The Seahawks didn't just lose Kenneth Walker III and scramble to replace him. They anticipated the shift, positioned themselves in the draft, and are now making roster moves that align with that long-term vision. Releasing Cam Akers right now, right after the draft, reinforces that this was always part of the plan, not a last-minute adjustment. What stands out is how intentional everything looks from John Schneider's side. He didn't just accumulate picks for the sake of it. He used them to create flexibility, to give himself multiple chances to hit on players who fit the identity of this team. Early in the draft, the focus was clear. Address the core needs. Running back with Jadarian Price. Secondary help with Bud Clark. Offensive line reinforcement with Bo Stevens. Those are not luxury picks. Those are foundational moves for a team that wants to remain dominant. Then came the second wave of selections, and this is where the strategy becomes even more interesting. Seattle started taking swings on players like Emmanuel Henderson Jr., Andre Fuller, Devin Eastern, and Michael Dansby. These are not players being asked to carry the team immediately, but they represent upside, depth, and special teams value. And here's the key part. Schneider didn't sacrifice much to get them. Most of these picks came from trade-backs, meaning the Seahawks essentially created extra opportunities without paying a heavy price. That's how you build sustained success in the NFL. You don't just focus on the stars. You create competition across the roster. You bring in players who can develop, contribute in roles, and eventually step up when needed. And if even one or two of those later picks turn into reliable contributors, this draft class suddenly looks even stronger. Now, going back to Mel Kiper Jr.'s evaluation, the B- grade feels more like a reflection of philosophy than execution. The argument is that Seattle, as a defending champion, should prioritize immediate impact above all else. But the Seahawks seem to be taking a more balanced approach. They're not ignoring the present, they're reinforcing it, but they're also making sure this team doesn't fall off a cliff in a year or two. And honestly, that might be the smarter way to handle a Super Bowl window. Because windows don't stay open just because you want them to. They stay open because you keep feeding the roster with talent, because you keep creating internal competition, and because you're willing to make tough decisions like moving on from players when it's time. That's exactly what happened with Cam Akers. It might not be a headline-grabbing move on the surface, but it tells you everything about how confident the Seahawks are in their current direction. They're not holding on to depth pieces out of caution. They're clearing space for players they believe in. And right now, all signs point to Jadarian Price being at the center of that belief. But there are still questions that need to be answered on the field. Can Price handle the workload of being RB1 over a full season? Can he improve in pass protection quickly enough to stay on the field in crucial situations? Will the offensive line, potentially anchored by a newcomer like Bo Stevens, give him the support he needs to succeed? And on defense, can Bud Clark translate his ball-hawking production from college into real impact against NFL offenses? Those are the details that will ultimately define whether this draft class and these roster decisions live up to the expectations. Because right now, everything looks good on paper. The strategy makes sense. The fits are there. The vision is clear. But in the NFL, it always comes down to execution. What you can't deny is that the Seahawks are being aggressive in their own way. Not reckless, not desperate, but deliberate. They're making moves with conviction, trusting their evaluations, and setting up this roster not just for another run this season, but for continued success beyond that. So as this offseason continues to unfold, keep a close eye on how these pieces start to come together. Training camp battles, especially at running back and along the offensive line, are going to be must-watch. The competition in the secondary is going to be real, and every snap we see will start to give us answers about whether this approach is going to pay off. If you want to stay on top of everything happening with the Seattle Seahawks, make sure you're subscribed, drop a like on the video, and don't miss the next update right here on the screen, because all the latest news and analysis, you're only going to find it here first.